In business today, three things to know. First, where are all the jobs? The private sector jobs report comes in just a little light. What to expect when the U.S. Labor Department reports numbers on Friday. Then, a large pharmaceutical chain says it will end sales of cigarettes. $2 billion in revenue for CVS just went up in smoke. And an Olympic mess. Growing concern that the Sochi Olympics are in disarray with contaminated water and stray dogs running wild. A Rise Exchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Private sector jobs grew at the most sluggish rate since August, and December numbers were revised downward. The payroll processing firm ADP reporting an increase of 175,000 jobs in January, slightly below estimates. The big number from the U.S. Labor Department will come out on Friday. We'll talk more about the jobs market in a moment. Other economic news, however, helped flatten out the markets on Wednesday, which began down but then came back a little bit. Specifically, the Institute for Supply Management now reports that manufacturing expanded at a better rate in January than expected. So let's take a look at the final numbers from the street. Dow Jones Industrial Average down just 5 points to 15,440. The S&P 500 down a fraction to 1751, and the Nasdaq down about 20 points to 4011. Taking a look at stocks we're watching today. Big day for Twitter. Its first earnings report since becoming public 3 months ago. It posted an adjusted fourth quarter profit of 2 cents a share. That topped expectations. Analysts were expecting a 2-cent loss. Revenues of $243 million also topped estimates of $219 million. After its debut in November, Twitter shares soared from its opening price of $26 to a high of $73. Today, it closed at $65.97. Time Warner reporting a profit of $983 million a share, or $1.06 a share, rather. That is down from $1.1 billion or $1.15 a share a year earlier, but did beat analyst expectations. The company also announced a $5 billion stock buyback program and a 10% increase in its quarterly dividend. Time Warner closing up 69 cents to 63.09. And 3M approved a new $12 billion share buyback program. This will replace last year's $7.5 billion buyback plan, which it never completed. 3M only spent a little more than $5 billion on last year's stock buyback program. Minnesota mining and manufacturing closing at $127.35. Taking a look at commodities, gold up $7.60 to $12.58, and oil up 22 cents to $97.41. Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 7% so far this year. A mere correction or more fundamental issues at play? Uri Landesman is the president of Platinum Partners, and he is once again back on a Rise Exchange. Thanks for coming. So we have had this rather large sell-off. You're in the view that this is a correction and that we're still in a bull market?
Yeah, so, I think what's going to happen is that we're going to see the market real short-term test 1,700 on the S&P. I think they're going to try to rally them a little bit. I think you could see a low in this very strong correction of as low as about 1525. And I also think that during 2014, we may test 1975 on the upside. I believe that that will be the end of the bull market, but that the 1850 high that the market put in about a month ago will not turn out to be the high of this bull market.
So the technical indication on the downside is 1700, and if we break through that, you're looking for the mid-1500s or
Correct.
so. What is driving the path down right now, do you think?
Yeah, so I think really the risk aversion trade is on, and I think it's for a couple of reasons. It started off with the problem in emerging markets, so some alarming economic data came out of China. We then followed up with currency crises in Argentina and Turkey, to name just a few, and we've seen a fairly dramatic sell-off in emerging market equities, emerging market sovereign debt, and emerging market currencies. I think that caused U.S. investors or people invested in U.S. stocks to take a look at the fact that basically it's been 5 years of straight up movement, most notably last year with the enormous year that all the U.S. indices had. And I think they're thinking, hey, the party may be over. Let's book some profits. Let's be on the sidelines right now. Make sure there isn't really a major disaster lurking.
So some of this is taking money off the table, but you think long term for the year or so. There are some opportunities there, and where do you like those opportunities?
Right. So, I think what's going to happen is especially if valuations get a little cheaper, so whether it's 1,700, but especially if it gets down to that 1,525 range, depending on which sectors move down from here. But I would think that natural resources are actually going to provide some opportunities, oil and gas, maybe some metals. I think there are going to be opportunities in healthcare. I think there are going to be opportunities in technology as well.
Where do you think we have a big jobs number coming in on Friday? Where do you think that number is going to come in at, and what is it going to mean? This is a number that the new Fed Chair Janet Yellen says she is very much going to be focused on.
Yeah, I think the number is going to come in okay, actually. I think the question is how much scrutiny are you going to put on it? Because I feel that one of the reasons the data has been okay is because so many people are dropping out of the job market. So it makes the denominator less. So it's very nice that we have 6.7% unemployment. That prima facie is a very nice number. Ideal unemployment for an economy is probably somewhere around 6%. But I fear that a lot of people simply aren't looking for.
Well, yeah, exactly your point. It's not a good number when you have a record number of people not in the job market. Would you be, or in the markets, be more comfortable if the number came up a little bit because people started to say, hey, maybe it's time to go get a job?
Right. So I'm going to watch that denominator very highly. How many people are being measured? And so if we get a decent number, even a 7 or a 7.1 at some point, but with a bigger denominator over it, it's really the number of jobs that I'm going to look at in the numerator more than what the actual ratio is.
And for the markets, how are they going to evaluate what the Fed may do? Because we are expecting another $10 billion probably tapered in March.
Yeah, so I think if the number is a disaster on Friday, which I don't expect, then the market's going to start pricing in a smaller taper, maybe as little as $5 billion. I think if it's basically in line, they're going to continue with this $10 billion taper.
Okay, Ori, thank you so much.
Great
Good
pleasure.
to see you. Well, after years of selling cigarettes in the same stores that it sold medication to combat diseases caused by smoking, CVS Caremark says it will get out of the cigarette business. CVS says it will be the first major pharmacy to take tobacco products off its shelves, impacting some 7,600 stores. However, in doing so, CVS will give up $2 billion in revenue a year. Britt Beamer is president of the American Research Group, and he joins us from Orlando. Britt, welcome back to Arise Exchange.
Andrew, thank you so much.
What do you think drove CVS's decision here? You think there was some outside pressure? Because it appears that this was a surprise.
Well, it makes no sense for them to give up $2 billion off their sales because they have not been that spectacular lately anyway. So I really do believe there's been some outside pressure. Now, I did call some friends of mine, since I knew I was going to be on the show, in the medical fields, and they know there's been some meetings, I know, with different drugstore companies from medical field people saying, look, we need to be better here and not be selling cigarettes at the same time we're trying to sell all these prescriptions. But I think there has to be more than that. Of course, you could also argue, Andrew, the other thing is, if they let them sell cigarettes and then make them withdraw that, why would they be forced to also withdraw all the beer and wine and alcohol they sell? So,
Sure.
I mean, if you get restrictive, where's one versus the other?
Well, that, and I mean, I'll tell you here in New York, if you want to go buy Sudafed at any of these stores, they put them behind the counter because they're afraid you're going to go make crystal meth from it, which I don't know is such a big problem in the apartments here in Manhattan. I have to ask you, though, if you're a shareholder of this company or if you're an employee of CVS, you just watched $2 billion go out, and there doesn't appear to be a plan to make up that money.
Well, that's what I read in the statement. There was no plan that they were going to go after some other category to replace it. And see, Andrew, when you're a retail analyst like I am and you look at all the numbers, keep in mind it isn't the $2 billion for cigarettes that they're losing. Mm-hmm. It's all the other things people buy. When somebody runs in to buy a pack of cigarettes and they buy 2 other items or 3 other items, that $5 purchase may become a $10 purchase. So now all of a sudden, you're not losing $2 billion, usually you're losing $4 billion. So, I mean, they've got to worry about those dollar sales. Now, what we don't know, and that is that, if their cigarette sales have been on the decline for a long time, they may argue that they should get out of it anyway because their numbers are going down. Because as you know, the convenience store industry has been the #1 channel for cigarette sales for the last few years. So they may very well say, we'll let them have it. But the bottom line is, I worry about them giving up $2 billion in cigarette sales plus whatever else they sell alongside those.
Yeah, well, for example, people may go, and I think we spoke about this earlier, may go to their competitor, Walgreens, still selling, I believe, cigarettes, correct? Or some other competitor.
That's the other issue.
Right.
See, that's the gamble they're playing, which I think is a bad one for one reason. If they go to the convenience store to buy their cigarettes, CVS is still okay because then the consumer at least is still coming back there to buy their prescriptions and other items. If they move from CVS to the Walgreens, then they got a big problem because now they're giving up cigarette sales plus all the pharmacy prescription sales. As you remember, in a drugstore environment, sometimes 40 to 70% of the profits are all on the prescription side of the business. So, it isn't the cigarettes they're giving up, it's how many prescriptions they're going to lose, and that's what they got to worry about.
Well, and I think it's interesting that you drew the line at cigarettes when they do sell beer and alcohol, and those cause all sorts of health problems as well. And, I think it's interesting in this country that you can go to Denver into a store and buy marijuana, but now you can't buy a legal product through all 50 states, which is cigarettes at CVS.
There's a lot of issues here, and that's why I've got to believe that there's been some political pressure. This administration has said repeatedly that they've been very anti-smoking. They want people to stop smoking, and they're putting more pressure on companies. I've got a client who told me last year they were being pressured very hard by this administration about dropping the category in their stores, but they refused to do it. So you just don't know how that is being affected, particularly with the healthcare program, because you have to realize, Caremark is the largest distributor, as I think, a prescriber of prescription medicines or distributor, whatever, in the country. So, that's a huge business, and that's obviously a very big part in the Affordable Health Care Act.
Well, if there was political pressure from the administration, we should remember that the president occasionally smokes himself. Do you think others are going to have to follow here?
I can't see anybody making any move in the short term. I guess you can look at long term, but I would think in the short term, everyone's going to kind of want to settle out and see where these customers are going to go, whether Walgreens is the beneficiary or the convenience stores. I would suspect that Walgreens will probably get about half the business and the convenience stores will get the other half, and therefore both will be winners and CVS will be the loser long term.
All right, we'll see how this plays out long term. I will say that when they banned smoking in bars and restaurants in New York, it helped the restaurant industry, so we never know. There may be some contrarian facts that come out later. Britt Beamer, president of the American Research Group, appreciate your time.
Andrew, thank you.
Coming up, Congress wants to know what retailers are doing about cybersecurity. You're watching Arise Exchange.
News can definitely be improved when reflecting diversity.
A lot of mainstream news, they don't dive into it.
Who wants to hear about negativity all the time?
They only show what they think people want to know and not what people really should know.
World-based stories, that's what I enjoy the most.
I think diversity of news is important to the world so that everybody will be aware of their surroundings and what is happening today.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can.
Welcome back to Arise Exchange. Time now for our business ticker. The federal budget deficit will fall to $514 billion this year, down from its previous estimate of $560 billion in 2013. According to the new Congressional Budget Office report, this is the lowest level during President Obama's presidency. However, after next year, the CBO estimates that the deficit will skyrocket to more than $1 trillion by 2022 because of the cost of Social Security, health care programs, and interest payments on the national debt. Congress went shopping for answers Wednesday at Target and Neiman Marcus following the massive security breaches this past holiday season that compromised credit card data for millions of shoppers. Lawmakers discussed ways to put a stop to cybercrime they say is a serious threat to security. Here's Target's Chief Financial Officer, John Mulligan.
To prevent this from happening again, none of us can go it alone. We need to work together. Updating payment card technology and strengthening protections for American consumers is a shared responsibility and requires a collected and coordinated response. On behalf of Target, I am committing that we will be an active part of the solution.
This is the first time Target has publicly answered questions about the attack that compromised the credit cards and data of some 40 million customers. Puerto Rico's beauty and splendor is definitely a sight for sore eyes this winter, but not so much for the island's bondholders. Standard & Poor's lowered the U.S. territory's credit rating to junk. The credit rating firm says the move was sparked by Puerto Rico's $70 billion in debt and limited access to funds. And you may have been hearing a lot about the new mint countries: Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. One of them, Nigeria, is becoming the new playground for the rich and famous. Kara Sutton reports.
Luxury homes, yachts and restaurants. This isn't Monaco, it's Lagos, Nigeria. Champagne and single malt whiskey are the drinks of choice for those enjoying the African nation's rapid economic growth. Felix Enwamadu is Nigeria's manager at the world's biggest distilled drinks firm, Diageo.
About, say, 3 to 4% of the population can afford luxury goods. So these are the guys and ladies who want to invest behind a Range Rover, can afford to have a Ciroc in the outlets on the week-on-week basis. Yeah, so there'll be about, say, 3 to 4% of the population.
The majority of Nigeria's 160 million people still live on less than $2 a day, and many have no access to clean water. Youth unemployment is also a problem. The middle class may be growing, but they are still very much the minority, says financial analyst Bismarck Rawani.
I would say that the Nigerians who are living above the poverty line have increased in number, but the Nigerians who can qualify as middle class or bourgeoisie, who have a major stake in society, are not growing as fast as is envisaged.
Luxury properties are changing the urban landscape, with the construction and real estate sectors growing at double-figure rates. The country overall saw growth of around 7% last year, a figure most in Europe can only dream of. But many investors don't believe there's enough variety of opportunity. Crude oil remains the country's main export. Mike Ingram is from BGC.
Anybody look into it has to do a lot of due diligence on the individual companies, the individual investment opportunities. I think at the moment, I think a lot of the best opportunities in countries such as Nigeria are actually to be found in areas such as project finance, venture capital and private equity.
There are entrepreneurs enjoying new opportunities. Tofik Okoya sells Nigerian dolls.
Notice that all the dolls that were there were white, and the way they were presented was not very child friendly, and for some reason that was when it hit me that we actually didn't have black dolls in our stores.
There are plenty of challenges. Corruption is rife and Islamic extremism is adding to the political instability. With elections next year, that could increase. A good opportunity perhaps for another Nigerian entrepreneur. Proforce makes luxury armoured vehicles for the wealthy elite.
Kara Sutton from Reuters, thank you. When Mary Barra became the first woman to head a major automaker, no one looked too closely at her pay package. Now, someone has. An analysis by Fox Business News claims to show that Barra is making only half as much as her predecessor, Daniel Akerson. Her 2014 compensation comes in at about $4.4 billion. And that has outraged some who claim she's getting paid less because she's a woman. But the numbers may not tell the whole story here, especially when you factor in performance bonuses. Hadley Heath is senior policy analyst with the Independent Women's Forum, joins us from North Carolina on the phone. Hadley, welcome back to Arise Exchange.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Can you really assign a gender gap question when you're talking about CEO pay?
Well, CEO pay is a little more complicated than your pay or my pay. I presume that we are paid with a base salary and sometimes with benefits, including retirement benefits or health insurance benefits. But typically, CEOs are also given generous stock options or bonuses that are sometimes referred to as short-term or long-term compensation. And we won't know what Mary Barra's long-term compensation package looks like until a report from GM in April of this year.
And we have to say GM appears to be very much on the upswing. She is coming at a time when this company has been turned around, and from what I understand, that could really skyrocket her overall package.
Absolutely. They've only announced so far her base pay will be $1.6 million and her short-term compensation will be $2.8 million. But together, that only totals $4.4 million, as you pointed out. And we know last year that Mary Barra, in a position not as highly paid as a CEO position, she earned $4.7 million. So knowing that she is a smart and assertive woman, she wouldn't be selected as CEO if she were not a smart and assertive businesswoman. She would not take a deal to have a total compensation package less as CEO than what she earned last year.
Is there a life lesson here, though? Because her predecessor, Danielle Ackerson, came from another company. Barra has spent her entire career at General Motors, and you hear this over and over again, that if you stay loyal to a company, you actually end up earning less because you have less bargaining power.
That may be part of the consideration. A lot of the discussion that we've seen from different news outlets and blogs today has been centered on the fact that Mary Barra is a woman rather than the fact that she's been a loyal GM employee. But I would always hesitate to make broad assumptions about one anecdotal piece of evidence. Mary Barra is one person, Dan Ackerson is another, and we ought to always consider the various experience levels, various choices, and various benefits that different employees are getting when we start to make comparisons about pay.
I suspect she's probably sitting in her office, if she has any time, kind of laughing at all of these reports and that we're talking about it. Isn't the bigger issue, though, here that there simply aren't that many women in the C-suite?
Well, that is part of it, and of course, when we have fewer examples to point to, it's easier to make anecdotal evidence part of a trend or try to connect the dots rather than looking at statistical averages. But even averages, you may remember that the president mentioned in his State of the Union address that women earn 77 cents compared to a man's dollar. That's a statistical average that doesn't take into account some of those variables I mentioned earlier, the different fields that men and women enter, the number of years they dedicate to a career rather than taking time out to raise children. All of these factors ought to be part of our consideration when we start to connect the dots on men and women's pay.
Hadley Heath, Senior Policy Analyst with the Independent Women's Forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up, our favorite person of the day from Canada. You are watching Arise Exchange.
Well, Arise is the only network that really covers comprehensively the African diaspora. It gives people in other parts of the world of color a chance to know about people here in the United States, us to know about them, and the world to know about us. So it's kind of an educational experience for everybody involved. Getting to know people through stories, through personal stories. You really get a chance to know what people are actually all about, what communities are about. How are we different? But more importantly, what commonalities we all share.
The great thing about Arise Entertainment 360 is that we cover the 360 of entertainment, food, fashion, lifestyle, culture. We're able to cover it all. And the thing I love most about the show is we're able to do a stunning combination of high and low. So we can talk about Rihanna on the red carpet, but we can also speak about high art with people like Sanford Biggers and Hank Willis. We actually spend quality time with our guests and we really get to know them. It's really intriguing because we get a 360 look at our guests.
Time now for our favorite person of the day, when we pick one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today it is Canadian pop star, troublemaker, and teenage brat Justin Bieber. According to reports, Bieber and his entourage smoked so much pot on a flight to the Super Bowl this weekend that the pilots had to put masks on so they could breathe and avoid inhaling any marijuana, which could jeopardize their pilot's license. Further, the crew says Bieber, along with his father, harassed and verbally abused the flight attendant throughout the trip, so much so she hid in the cockpit. It was so bad that when the private jet landed at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, it was met by agents from the U.S. Department of Drug Enforcement and Border Patrol. Now, a search of the plane turned up no drugs, but drug-sniffing dogs did act as if there were plenty of drugs present at one time. Bieber told police he was attending the Super Bowl at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey, but in fact drove into New York City to attend various Super Bowl parties, and we have learned that he was turned away from at least 4 of them. This is Bieber's third encounter with the law in the past month. He's been arrested for drunk driving and drag racing in Miami and arrested in Toronto for allegedly assaulting a limo driver. It's unclear why the U.S. keeps letting the Canadian Bieber into the country. Maybe that should be part of any immigration reform bill that Congress debates. And so, Justin Bieber, is our favorite person of the day. Next, scandal at Sochi. Why? The Winter Olympics is turning into the most expensive one ever, and the mess it may be leaving behind when Arise Exchange comes back. The opening ceremony for the Winter Olympics is Friday, and all those going, including the athletes, may be in for an unpleasant surprise. Sochi, the Russian city hosting the Games, is said to be a total mess. Complaints include unsafe man-made snow, contaminated water, poor hotels, and inadequate security. Yet, at $51 billion, this is the most expensive Olympics to date. Sport business analyst and Oppenheimer executive director Stephen Colavito joins us from Atlanta on the phone. Stephen, let me ask you, we have been seeing reporters tweet these photographs of dirty water, of poor hotels. Is this just some complaints, or is there some serious problems there?
No, there's some serious problems, and quite frankly, the pictures are rather gross. I think that, certainly right now there's only 6 of the 9 hotels that were ready or should have been ready are completed, and that's a very liberal term saying that they're completed. They're missing light bulbs, doorknobs, you name it. There's still 3 more that have to be complete, and they have 2 days to do it. So it's an absolute mess right now in the village. And
and we heard reports today that Shaun White says that some of the venues may in fact be dangerous. So they've spent $51 billion on what?
Well, to run an Olympics, it really only cost a town about $4 billion. So the remainder of the money is the big question mark. A lot of it goes into infrastructure. Remember, Sochi was not a ski resort. It's a beach resort that sits on the coast of the Black Sea. So they've literally created a ski resort out of nothing, and all the infrastructure to get to a fairly remote location is what has cost so much money. But, it's a blow to the IOC. It's a blow to Vladimir Putin, and it's a blow to NBC because NBC is relying on some of their superstars like Shaun White to be in these events.
You're in Atlanta right now, which of course hosted a relatively successful Olympics. How concerned, if you have any information, are the Russians right now?
Well, I talked to several folks that are actually in Sochi right now. They've got the Russians have put 300,000 police and military personnel in and around these events. They've actually issued special kind of internal passports for those that are both athletes and those that are visitors inside the arena. So they're taking a tremendous amount of precaution because they know that terrorism, where Sochi sits very close to the border of Chechnya. So it's a high terrorism area. They know this, and so they're absolutely trying to put out all the stops to make sure that it's a secure event.
Yeah, let me ask you this.
Like we had in Atlanta, we had Eric Rudolph that lit a bomb in Centennial Park. These things can happen when you have a high volume of people and when people want to hurt others.
We have about 30 seconds left. How much do you think this is going to impact the coverage of the games? The NBC covers the Olympics like the old Soviet Politburo. It's very hard to have access there. Do you think we're going to see these reports come out, or do you think they're going to clear this up by then?
Well, I think that part of it will get cleared up. I think for NBC, their bigger issue right now is losing Lindsey Vonn and losing Shaun White in some of these events. I think they're going to put a lot of their attention on Lolo Jones. So I think they're going to try to put a pretty face on this because they obviously want to keep their sponsors happy.
Okay.
But I think that's what's going to end up happening.
Stephen Colavito, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Andrew.
Coming up, the highly anticipated January employment report will be out on Friday. Investors are hoping for a rebound after December's disappointing results. Let's take a quick look at how the markets finished the day. A rather flat day across the way for the Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 after recovering yesterday. The Dow Jones Industrial Average still off about 7% for the year. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Arise Exchange.